Playground, puppet, and partner. Europe has been a lot of things for the US. In many ways, this relationship defined the second half of the 20th century. It created many of the institutions we still use. But now, that special relationship is at risk. Why? Thanks to Donald Trump. He's not a big fan of Europe. Whether it's on trade, defense, or technology, Trump feels that Europe is ripping America off. His solution? Impose tariffs on them. The US president has announced 30% tariffs on European goods, 30%. They will kick in on the 1st of August. Initially, the EU, the European Union, was planning to respond. They had prepared tariffs of their own, but now they've hit pause. Brussels is going to wait until early August. They want to try talks first. And it's clear why. The US-EU goods trade is worth $975 billion. $975 billion. European exports make up $605 billion. American exports make up $370 billion. So the trade is stacked in Europe's favor. Imagine a 30% tariff on this exchange. EU officials fear it would effectively end transatlantic trade.
Practically, it prohibits the trade. So if you're talking about 30% or 30% plus, there will be a huge impact on trade. It will be almost impossible to continue the trading as we are used in a transatlantic relationship.
The problem is obvious. Europe is too dependent on the US. Washington makes up 20% of total European exports. So naturally, the EU is worried. They would much rather sign a deal than pick a fight. But here's the problem. That's a short-term fix. In the long term, Brussels seems to be looking at a permanent solution. And what's that? What is a permanent solution to this problem? A divorce with America. Europe has long talked about de-risking from China. They could now de-risk from the US as well. French President Macron proposed this during his visit to London.
If we compare our countries with the United States, but we will have as well to de-risk our two countries for the excessive dependencies on both the US and China.
So what's the plan here? We'll discuss the defense strategy later. For now, let's look at the finances. The EU is looking to diversify its markets. They're eyeing more trade with Canada, more trade with the UK, and also more in Asia. For example, India and the EU are expected to sign a free trade deal this year. That would give Europe a large market. They're also looking at a deal with Indonesia. In fact, the Indonesian president is in Europe this week. He agreed to work towards a trade agreement.
We're living in turbulent times, and when economic uncertainty meets geopolitical volatility, partners like us must come closer together. So today we're taking a big step forward in this partnership, and we're doing so in three key areas. The first is trade. I am very pleased to report that we have just reached a political agreement on an ambitious free trade agreement.
That's a clear plan. Strike out on your own, explore new markets, and reduce dependence on the United States. That is the plan. If successful, it will reverse decades of American policy. Just think back to the Second World War. Nazi Germany was rampaging through Western Europe. It was the US that rescued them. Even after the war, the rescue continued. The US decided to rebuild and re-industrialize Europe. The continent had been shattered by war, so Washington decided to pump money into their economy. Thus emerged the Marshall Plan. It is named after a former US Secretary of State. It was passed by the US Congress in 1948. The Marshall Plan. What did it do? The Marshall Plan pumped $12 billion into rebuilding Europe. It may not sound like a lot of money today, but remember, we're talking about 1948. 12 billion meant a lot more back then. There's a lot of debate around why America did this. Why did they spend this kind of money? Secretary Marshall was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. But this was not just a humanitarian gesture, because aid is more often than not political and strategic. Look at this American aid in the Marshall Plan. Why was it limited to Western Europe? Why not war-torn Eastern Europe? Because the East was Moscow's turf. Clearly, there was a strategic reason. The US wanted to limit Soviet influence in Europe. They wanted to recruit allies in Europe in the looming fight against Moscow. So whatever the trigger for this aid, it was effective. The Marshall Plan successfully reignited Europe's economy. It also created a strong transatlantic bond. Which brings us to present day. Does Donald Trump care about this bond? Not from the looks of it. He recently said the EU was formed to quote-unquote screw the US.
The European Union's it was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest. The European Union was formed in order to screw the United States. That's the purpose of it. And they've done a good job of it, but now I'm president.
Well, that simply is not true. Yes, the EU was created in the European continent, but it had its roots in America. US lawmakers argued for a federal Europe. They talked about creating a United States of Europe, like the United States of America. So make no mistake, the EU was indirectly an American creation, and it served them well. It served the Americans, often at the expense of the Europeans. The latest reminder came from Jamie Dimon. He is the chief of JP Morgan. He was recently in Ireland. He told Europe that you're losing. Losing in what? Competitiveness, in the ability to create big corporations. And he has a point. Europe never built its own systems. They simply bought from the Americans, whether it's weapons or social media platforms, AI or semiconductors. They kept buying, and that policy was built on a major assumption. The assumption that Washington would always stand by Europe. But with Donald Trump, that's out the window. He doesn't see long-term strategy or gains. He sees short-term transactions, hence his focus on tariffs and defense budgets. There's nothing Europe can do immediately to counter this, but in the long run, Europe has multiple options to explore. The world is heading towards multipolarity. You would bet on Brussels becoming one of those poles.
First post now available in 9 languages on YouTube. English,
Stands at $36 trillion.
French,
Le FMI, comme
German,
Geschäftsführenden Direktor
Hindi,
$30 trillion kakaljo.
Indonesian,
Pemerintah tanpa pemeriksaan.
Italian,
Kali radikali. Stop.
Japanese,
4 trilhão euro idioma.
Portuguese,
Por causa do próprio balanço patrimonial.
Spanish.
Beautiful bill.
Go to Settings, click on Audio Track and select the language of your choice. Be the first to know what's happening around you in your first language. First post.